Okay, so before I get into the review proper, I'd like to say that I will be playing the PAL version for this review, save for some borrowed footage courtesy of ProDrive GT. The reason is because the NTSC ROM that I downloaded was corrupted, and would crash every time that I tried to open the file. So yeah, I'm having to resort to using a foreign ROM for this video. It won't make much of a difference aside from the speedometer and soundtrack, but hopefully you will understand my decision, as I had no other choice aside from shelving this review. Gran Turismo 2 is one of my favorite games ever. Hell, on certain days, it's my absolute favorite game of all time. Part of that's down to the fact that it was my first game I ever played, or so my memory claims. It's been a long time. But also because of the sheer amount of content that it offered. There are games now that don't have the same level of content that GT2 does. And for that, I gave it my first ever 10. Now, a 10 doesn't necessarily mean that a game is perfect, but it does mean that you are doing yourself a disservice by not playing it. And I would recommend that everybody gives GT2 a shot. So with the game as godlike as Gran Turismo 2, how exactly do you follow that up? Well, firstly, you make the next evolution on a new cutting-edge console called the PS2. No more poo-poo diarrhea graphics. Finally, video games that halfway resemble real life. This is where we reach Gran Turismo III, also known as Gran Turismo 3 A-spec. Now, I don't know what an A-spec is, but according to Google, it's a slang term for an asexual. Gotta give Polyphony Digital credit for being inclusive, I guess. In all seriousness though, it's just some racing term. Gran Turismo 3 was Polyphony Digital's attempt at showcasing how powerful the PS2 was. I know it sounds kinda funny now, but the PS2 really was the cutting edge back in the early 2000s, and we were blown away by it. Before I get into the important stuff, I'd like to say that Gran Turismo 3 is one of the best looking PS2 games. Especially for a game that came out in early 2001. Yeah, believe it or not, but this is a pre-9/11 game, by the way. Every car and track is polished to a mirror's sheen, and even now this game still looks decent. Anyways, I'll start off with arcade mode as with my last Gran Turismo review. Arcade mode in Gran Turismo 2 was pretty much an afterthought. And while I enjoyed it as a kid, I can't deny that it was pretty flawed looking back. Well, Gran Turismo 3 certainly improves that. You can unlock many tracks and cars simply by playing arcade mode. Hell, you can buy this game for arcade mode alone and get your money's worth. This is certainly the best that arcade mode has ever been, even when considering the future GT games. You even get some time trials that you can try to beat. If you do beat all of them, you get a special race car for simulation mode. It's very hard to pull off, but you can unlock it as your first car and turn this game into a cakewalk. Admittedly, the track selection is kinda disappointing in this game. While it has almost all of the best tracks in the first two games, there are very few new tracks, so few that you can count them on one hand. My favorite new tracks would probably be Tokyo R246, a very cathartic track to race on, Swiss Alps, which is technically just a reimagining of the mediocre Smoky Mountains South, but nonetheless it's a pretty damn good track, and Monte Carlo, an actual real-life track. Funnily enough, this track was actually planned for GT2, but got cut due to time constraints. My favorite returning courses would be Smoky Mountain, which looks better than ever. My god is it gorgeous. Grand Valley Speedway, and Special Stage Route 11. The latter of which was just an altered track from the first game, so it's kind of a new track, I guess? It's a very hard course, but I really like the feel, so I still love it even though it whoops my ass. Arcade mode in Gran Turismo 3 is almost flawless, and the best the series has ever seen. But at the end of the day, simulation mode is the real deal, and definitely the main selling point in every Gran Turismo game, save for Sport and PSP. Now, whether you like it or not, the license tests are required to enter most races, although you do have more license-free races this time, so it's not all bad. Plus, there are slightly fewer tests per license. Again, the real goal of these is to train you on the game's handling model, which leans towards the realism side of the spectrum. Braking is mandatory when cornering. Honestly, the worst licenses in the game are the start and stop ones because they serve little purpose and are boring as fuck. But once you are done with that, it's time to buy a car. And oh boy, this is where the game gets really disappointing. Now, Gran Turismo 2 had a whopping 650 cars, which is a lot even now. How many does 3 have in comparison? Only 180. Now look, GT3 doesn't need as many cars as its predecessor. There were many cars in that game that were simply pointless filler cars, so cutting the fat was actually a good idea. But the car list in this game is less cutting the fat and more of a sign of it being rushed. There's only one BMW, no classic muscle cars aside from maybe the Shelby Cobra, if that counts, no Mark III Supra, and only one Mustang that comes in only red. While there's still plenty of great cars, this game's cut down roster just makes me want more. Polyphony definitely should have spent more time on this game so they could add more cars and tracks. At the very least, the car count should have been closer to 300. But at the end of the day, you still have tons of events to partake in, most of which give you various prize cars for completing them. You have many of the same types of events from the first 2 games, such as the Sunday and Clubman Cup, drivetrain events, and various national events. But I won't lie that this game's campaign feels more repetitive than the last one. The drivetrain events are repeated in each event tier, but only with more laps and faster cars. And the one-make races are barely even a thing anymore due to the smaller car count. Again, the car count has had an effect on the variety of events, hence why there are so many repeated ones. But one thing simulation mode has been greatly improved in is the rally events. In GT2, these events were a mere afterthought that offered practically no rewards for beating them, whereas now you get a decent amount of prize money and even earn rally cars for beating them. Endurance races also return and are still kind of a slog to sit through, but then again, you earn a lot for winning them, so it's worth at least trying the easier ones. I'd say that simulation mode in this game isn't as satisfying as it was in the last game. Even though you do technically have more events, I think, you don't get the same satisfaction from building a garage full of cars like in 2 or even 1 to an extent. But on the other hand, actually racing is more fun than ever, and that's largely down to this game's driving physics and the stellar soundtrack playing in the background. Now, I can't play any of these songs due to copyright issues, but I will say that this has my favorite Gran Turismo soundtrack, at least on the North American version that is, with artists such as Judas Priest, Jimi Hendrix, The Cult, Snoop Dogg, Motley Crue, and others all featuring on it. Fucking hell, Snoop Dogg has a song that he specifically wrote for this game on it. I can't play it, but hopefully I will link it in the description so you can hear it. It's an absolute bop. The original soundtrack is amazing as well, and goes for a funkier jazz kind of feel. It still has an energetic feel, unlike later entries which strive for a more smooth jazz type of sound. Lastly, the menu aesthetic is still astounding. It feels like a more simplified version of GT1 and 2's menu, although nothing will ever top Gran Turismo 2's menu. I like this menu because it's easy to navigate without being boring. I honestly think many game menus could take a cue from the ones in Gran Turismo 3 A-spec. Gran Turismo 3, in spite of some flaws, is still a fantastic game, and blew the minds of many back in the early 2000s with its graphics and physics. I probably would have loved this game more than 2 as a kid based solely off of the content-packed arcade mode, and for the time, realistic graphics. But having not grown up with this game and being much older and wiser now, I can easily see that this game is not perfect and wasn't really deserving of the perfect scores it received upon launch. Gran Turismo 2 and to a lesser extent 1 did much more for their time. GT2 is still worthy of months of playtime with its sheer amount of cars, and 1 laid the groundworks for that magnum opus. Gran Turismo 3, while one of the better games in the series, feels undercooked. I was originally planning on being more negative, but this game has grown on me in spite of its lack of content. The graphics, gameplay, and soundtrack are still some of the best in the series. So overall, I give it an 8.5 out of 10. Still fantastic, but a major step down from the greatness of 2, and only half a point better than the first game. But we aren't done yet, as I'd like to talk about GT3's little-known expansion pack, Gran Turismo Concept. This title was only released in Europe and Asia, sadly. I get that America wasn't great in the early 2000s, but that didn't mean we shouldn't have gotten this title. Assholes. This is a bite-sized spin-off that features many concept cars, hence the name, and some cars that should have been in vanilla GT3. Other than that, the game looks identical to Gran Turismo 3, but the gameplay is a different story. Instead of a proper career mode, this game features a series of time trials that you must beat in order to unlock new tracks and cars, and racing the individual tracks in turn also unlocks more cars. It's a unique spin on Gran Turismo. While it features only around 50 cars, it makes up for that with the new cars that it has added. Why wasn't the Ford Focus and Volkswagen Golf in GT3? The game is really only a small spin-off title and features only 6 tracks, all of which appeared in GT3 save for Autumn Ring, which was mysteriously absent from the vanilla game along with High Speed Ring. Man, GT3 really was missing a lot of stuff. This game wasn't too successful and nowadays goes for high prices on eBay, so I'd recommend that you emulate it if you can. I won't be rating it because it's not a full game at all, but I will say that it is worth checking out for curiosity's sake, and I certainly enjoyed the time I spent playing it. The Gran Turismo series rarely gets talked about here on YouTube, and while in recent years there's been a lot of funny meme videos on the series, I still hardly ever see any popular reviewers talk about it, probably because they all have their heads so far up Nintendo's ass that anything even remotely realistic is garbage to them. I'm someone who likes all sorts of game, whether it's violent open-world games like GTA, or E-rated platformers like Spyro. So seeing YouTube reviewers talk about only the nerdiest of games is just as frustrating as dude bros who only play Fortnite and GTA Online. In spite of GT's high sales figures, I can't help but feel as if though Gran Turismo is underrated on here. And the first couple of Gran Turismo games are absolute classics that anyone regardless of gaming taste should give a shot. But my favorite in the series will always be 2 till the day I die. So I've played 6 different Gran Turismo games. The first 4, Sport, and the recently mentioned Concept. As such, I'd like to review my top favorite GT games that I've played from worst to best. 5 and 6 will not be counted, sadly. Number 6, Gran Turismo Concept. This is at the bottom of the list because it isn't a full game. Yet I'd say that I still had a good time with it. And playing this rare and expensive game through emulation was certainly an experience like no other. Number 5, Gran Turismo Sport. This is one of the weakest Gran Turismo games in spite of updates fixing its mediocrity. While it currently has a damn fine selection of cars, it still lacks any of the original tracks, with most of the focus being on real-life tracks instead. While a great game on its own right, this game still disappoints me as a longtime GT fan. Number 4, Gran Turismo the Original. This all-time classic certainly was miles ahead of its time and laid the foundation for the entire series, but there's no denying that it became obsolete as soon as its sequel dropped. I still love this game for all the classic tracks that carried on through most of the series, but I rarely touch this game due to its tiny amount of content in comparison to the rest of the series. Number 3 is, fittingly enough, Gran Turismo 3. A game that's grown on me in recent time despite lacking content. Thankfully, what content is there is all fantastic, and this game has a certain early 2000s charm to it that makes it cathartic to play. Number 2, Gran Turismo 4. This game is a fucking masterpiece, and I hope to review it sometime in the future. It was a toss-up between this and GT2 as my number 1 pick, it was so good. And I will admit that this probably is the best in the series. But it doesn't have the nostalgia factor of my number 1 pick, and that would be Gran Turismo 2. What else needs to be said about this masterpiece? I just want to give this game a good old kiss on the butt for how much I love it. The amount of hours I spent on this game is unmatched, and I'll be playing this gym till the day I die, it's so damn good. Nothing, and I mean nothing in Gran Turismo's future will ever top this one. A perfect 10 for the rest of eternity.